and Gary Lacefield, who's joining us now in the studio as well. I'm very impressed the fact that he was 17 years old and decided that he wanted to run for any type of public office at 17.
That's amazing, because at 60 plus, I'm not really sure what I want to do when I grow up.
You know what's funny about that? It's funny you say that, because I still to this day, when people say, oh, what is your dream? I'm like, well, I don't really have a dream. I've got several things that I'd like to accomplish, some of them in a career-wise. Some of them have nothing to do with money or career, just something I just want to do. But to be 17 years old and run for an office.
Unbelievable. I mean, even some of our, many of our students who are in the early 20s, I can't imagine them being a judge over anything.
Yeah. But trust me, when I was 17, you didn't want me judging anything. You didn't even want me driving. I was probably a threat to society on that. And I love his campaign, JP for JP.
Oh, that's very catchy. Very catchy.
And wearing out all the shoes that he had, and really making a difference in people's lives, which I think will segue great into one of the aspects that you cover, which is truancy, which is a problem here in the state of Texas.
Correct. Correct.
And
one of the focuses of my Institute of Mediation, Arbitration, Legal Studies, and Forensics is to help identify why we here in Texas have such a major truancy problem. Per capita, we like to be number one. Texans like to be number one in pretty much everything, but this is a category we don't really want to be.
Yeah, we don't want to be number one in this.
Yeah, we are, per capita, we have the highest truancy rate of any state in the union. It'd be interesting to know that per capita, Minnesota has the second highest truancy rate. So, but anyway, the truancy rate, and if you start at looking at what our jail population is, if you take out white-collar criminals, which white-collar criminals typically have some education because they are in positions to where they can manipulate money or do white-collar crime, those types of things. So if you eliminate that category, 92% of our prison population consists of folks that never finished school. And so a tremendously high dropout rate, which truancy affects everyone, not just obviously the student, but it also affects our economy. It affects the schools because the schools are paid based upon attendance. And so that's why census date is such a very important thing for our K through 12 schools. Obviously, it's an important factor in secondary in higher education as well.
Wow, 92. I'm just still thinking about that 92%.
92%. Didn't finish school.
Did not finish school. And there had to be something that pulled them away from going to school. It could have been a broken home, single parent, single mother, no dad, no mother, a single dad. Variables in that.
Absolutely. One of the things now, JP had shared his interesting story with us this morning about coming from a broken home and so forth, and he obviously turned out very well. Kind of the same thing in our family. I'm the oldest of five. We were on our own from when I was 12. Neither one of my parents were graduated high school, so we didn't have that model to follow. But somehow or the other, I'm fortunate that I was given the opportunity at 17 when JP was elected judge. I was it was towards the tail end of the Vietnam War, and I was given the opportunity to join the Air Force. And so at 17, I joined the Air Force. Well,
thank you for your service.
Well, thank you very much. Vietnam era vet, although I served as a medic in Korea. So we worked on the folks that were injured in Vietnam, the ones that were hurt, not bad enough to be sent home, but so that we could patch them up so they could get sent back out in the field. But and those are a couple of heartbreaking stories there. But
sure.
But anyway, on a positive note, I think, because I've lived it, experienced it, is that, regardless of whatever the environment that you've come from, for example, I have an MBA and a doctorate. I have one sister, and she's the vice principal over at Grand Prairie High School. Shout out to the Gophers there. And I have a younger brother, who is just retired as a principal of a school in Liberty, Texas, right outside of Houston. So it was that. I'm not quite sure if they followed because of my example or they did it in spite of me or whatever, but my younger siblings certainly passed that test. But I think that the primary issue is that whether it's, my guidance came from joining the Air Force, going that route. I think other people do not have that guidance, whether it's from the family or from the home. For example, a lot of these fraud cases that we handle, the fraud isn't always on the side of the loan officers, the real estate agents, or the appraisers. Lots of times it's on the consumer, where the consumer will exaggerate their income and not talk about as many debts as they truly do have. And so just to give you an idea of how my children we're kind of given some guidance about finances. My daughter, for example, she calls me one day, and we always taught our children not to put anything on a credit card that you couldn't pay off on the next payment. And so we deal with, like I said, we deal with mortgage fraud, credit crisis all the time with our clients. And so she calls me one day and she says, "Dad, please, first of all, please don't tell Mom. But
I've said that before.
I've got
hey, it's between you and I,
right? Just us, right? And so, and her mom still doesn't know unless she's listening to the show. But she said, "Dad, I can't. I've overspent this month." And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she's got a credit card bill of $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000,
$10,000,
right?
Yeah.
Because we see it. Yeah. And so I said, "Okay, well, how much is it?" And she said, "It's $250." And I just kind of pause, partly because of shock, and then partly for effect. And then I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll help you pay it off this one time, but don't you ever get in this situation again." So, I mean, I was so relieved that it was only $250. Right. And from that point on, I mean, she could tell you where every penny is.
So she's very fiscal responsible.
Very, and her children are learning the same thing. My grandchildren.
Dr. Gary Lacefield joining us this morning. Now, we'll get into the storm situations, and pretty much he's got some great tips on what you need to know when it comes to dealing with an insurance company, because you can come out on the wrong end of the stick on something like that.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely.
So let's take a quick break if we could, and we'll come back, talk about that, plus the biggest stories of 2015. We'll talk about that and how. All right, we're back, 8:16, right here on KEXP, your experts in business. Dr. Gary Lacefield from Tarleton State University in Fort Worth is joining us. Now, we've got some advice for homeowners.
We got some advice. So to start off with, the insurance folks, the insurance adjusters, they're incentivized to get you in and out the door as quickly as possible. So don't do that unless you have. Do not do that. First of all, if you have something that can still be inspected, obviously a lot of those homes down in Duncanville, they don't exist anymore. But certainly you need to get an outside third party to give you an estimate of what the value of that was. Now, it was mentioned earlier, and I think that you had mentioned that you had a guest on earlier this week, a roofer,
sure, that
talked about use someone who's license bonded, use someone that the insurance company has already blessed. Well, it's been my personal experience that using the contractors that the insurance companies provide, once again, they're still maybe at a short arm's length distance, but they're still agents of the insurance company.
Sure.
And for them to stay as contractors for the insurance company, are they going to look out after your interest as the consumer, or are they going to look out after the insurance company's interest?
Yeah.
And so that's why it's important that you, I think, certainly you can get a bid from the insurance company's contractors, but I would take the extra half a day or a couple of hours, and very few people charge for estimates anymore. So, get 2 or 3 estimates before you sit down and sign that check, because because you're certainly going to have buyer's remorse. If you walk in and out, and I saw on the news the other night, I don't remember which insurance carrier it was, but they were talking about this person. They were interviewing the consumer who came out of the tent, and he said, I went in there. I didn't even have my insurance policy. They were able to pull it up online, which that's also another problem. You should always have a copy of your insurance policy, sure. And not in the house where you're at, like in a safe deposit box or some other location. But you're relying on them. If this was 30 years ago, I would say, companies work a little bit different than they do now. Now, 30 years ago, a handshake would suffice for a contract. Now, everything is in writing. And no matter what the agent tells you, well, don't worry about that. We'll replace the trees. Don't worry about that. We'll replace the shrubs. Don't worry about that. The doghouse that blew away, we'll replace that. If it's not in writing, if it's not on that sheet, then any oral message that they give you is going to be tough for you to collect on later. So everything needs to be in writing.
Absolutely, because some of these kids' playground equipment that you might have in the backyard that cost thousands of dollars, that might be easily overlooked when the heat of the moment and you're passionate, you're in a state, you're an emotional, you're a dumpster fire, essentially emotional, trying to resolve all these things. You can forget all that stuff. The trees in the front have value to them. That blew over. You're not thinking about that. But
absolutely.
So yeah, you're leaving a lot of money on the table that you rightfully should be compensated.
Oh, absolutely. And for example, and my heart goes out to those families where you just look and there's nothing left. No mementos, no anything.
Nothing.
And so it's just like I was talking to a person in Michigan this morning about the storm that they had, the flood and the storm that they had, and so forth. Well. I mentioned to them, well, most folks have smartphones now. Most folks have cell phones, or they've got photos stored somewhere. Pull those out from the last Christmas party you had, or from the last New Year's party you had, or from the last summer 4th of July party you had, because that's probably going to be indicators of some of the assets that you just lost that you can't prove up because you don't have receipts because they're gone.
They're gone. So that's a great tip. So a homeowner now, why not take a Saturday, take the weekend, videotape everything, take pictures of everything, and then put that, obviously you've got to store that on a computer that hopefully doesn't get destroyed or anything like that. Maybe post it up. I don't know if you can do a private photo album on Facebook, but Facebook's a great archive for some of the stuff that you might have. So, upload it to that and keep it on a cloud-based product.
Sure, absolutely. Just so long as you have some proof, some evidence, but certainly don't walk out of there with a check, 15 minutes later, because you're already in a state of shock. Sure. Because you've lost everything. Now you're grateful that you're still alive, and so people have a tendency to take advantage of people in their weakest moments, and so. If you need money for housing, if you need money for food, if you need those life essentials, accept a check for those immediate life needs.
I was going to say, can they cut a check just for that?
Absolutely. They can. I've yet to see an insurance policy where they can't get you over the hump with just life necessities.
Gotcha.
So if you need a couple of $1,000 or whatever that might be to get you until you can sit down and put together a list of what you've lost and the value of items, then that's what you need to do.
That's what you need to do. Great advice, Dr. Gary Lacefield. Now, we talked a little bit about truancy as well, which is a big part of it. Right. And also, you guys deal with when you think of criminology, you think of police officers. But let's talk about some of the other categories that fall under criminology.
Okay, and I'd like to, we talked about the insurance folks, but I'd like to touch on things to look out for contractors, if we could just a
Absolutely.
moment. These contractors, and like I mentioned earlier, there's a group out there, they're called the Tinkers, Irish Travelers, and so forth, but they roam.
And word has it they're in the Duncanville area?
They're already here. some of the things to look out for, and most people don't get references. That is just that's beyond me now. You need to get at least 2 references, 3 if possible, and the references need to be local references. Look up their vehicles. If they have out-of-state license plates, that's something you should question, because if they have out-of-state license plates on their vehicles, they're probably not licensed and bonded in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You want to make sure that they can prove that they have insurance. That like I said, the references are critical. They need to be able to provide you with at least 2 references. And then if anybody demands any upfront cash, that's always a clear sign that either you just shouldn't be working with this company because they don't even have enough resources
to buy the supplies,
to buy the materials, right, and to pay their staff. And so, can you sign a contract? Sure. But if you have insurance, most insurance checks are going to be made out to the consumer and to whoever's holding the note on the property. And so what you want to make sure is that you're dealing with somebody who's reputable. You're dealing with somebody who is going to be there to honor whatever warranty that they're expressing. It takes about 10 seconds to go to the Better Business Bureau and see if this company has complaints. So,
or even exists. Or you could just go to Google, exist. I would think, and just type them in.
Right. You could go to the Secretary of State's office, it's a free search site in Texas, to see if they're a Texas registered company.
Okay.
Or if they're listed, or if they're bonded. The construction business in Texas, the Home Builders Association in Texas. It's one of the few states where anyone that's doing any type of these repairs have to be licensed, bonded, and insured.
But almost like when you see the pictures you're seeing on television, online, these people need more than a roof. I mean, it almost looks it's taken down to the slab.
Right.
So how do you negotiate that as far as rebuilding your entire home?
Well, once again, one of the things that people tend to forget is while my home's being rebuilt, how are my expenses going to be covered? Now, you would certainly still be paying a mortgage somewhere. You would still be paying rent somewhere. But once again, don't be taken advantage of. You need to make sure that all of those things that would be involved in that the insurance company could cover are taken care of.
Good point. Now, what's some of the feedback that you've heard so far from this disaster for boots on the ground there? They're talking to homeowners and insurance companies.
Well, just looking at it from not even the 30,000-foot view, we were I actually live in Burleson, and we just got a lot of rain. But looking at the scenes from TV, the first thing that goes through my mind is, oh my gosh, I hope these folks had insurance. And now let's talk about just for a second, if they didn't have insurance or if they didn't have adequate insurance. Now, the governor has already declared this, the county, the area, as a disaster area. So use those resources. The state can give you low or no interest loans to rebuild if you have no insurance. So there's lots of access to resources out there, but many of these you're going to have to go and look up yourself.
That's it. Do your homework. All right.
Do your homework.
Just take a quick break, and then we'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Plus, the biggest stories of 2015. We'll recap that and get your thoughts on it as well. Hang with us through the break.
You make the biggest stories of 2015?
What did I say, 2012? All right. We're back, and, of course, Gary Lacefield is joining us. And we've talked about on the show the jobs of the future, and with all the counterterrorism, and seems like, there's new divisions opening up every month of some type of counterterrorism type job, a position that getting into the School of Criminology or Criminal Justice would be a smart move to enroll yourself in a class and get some of the specialized training that you guys offer.
Oh, absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a growth industry. And as I also mentioned, I think that we have a unique group of faculty there that, as you mentioned with JP, we walk the talk. So we've been in the field. We have done this. Myself, I've done over 1,400 mediations. with a 98% settlement rate. So you want to learn from those folks. We've got folks that have been, like I said, GM Cox, Dr. GM Cox, who has 40 years of experience in law enforcement, most of it as a police chief. So, you're getting that type of expertise. We've got Randy Butler, who is he's the oldest person in our group. I wouldn't say he's the most mature, but he's over 70. But he's a national expert on tribal crime, tribal law enforcement, which is that within itself is just a unique field that is woefully underserved. But also, what we talked about was that just because you're a criminology major doesn't mean that you're going to be a police officer. Certainly, a lot of our students are police officers, but or in law enforcement. But there are a lot of aspects to criminology, criminal justice, the criminal justice system, where one of the focuses that we have right now. I mean, a week doesn't go by when you don't see some conflict that seemed like it got out of hand. Like with the officer who arrested the young lady,
Sandra
Bland, and she hung herself. Of course, there was a lot of misinformation that was put out by certainly from the family side, but also some lack of information from law enforcement side that might have helped clear these things up. But one of the things that we talk about in the Institute of Mediation Arbitration is how to de-escalate. The number one rule for mediators is that you don't create additional conflict. And so, police officers, they really, if you look at their mantra, they're really called peace officers. They're supposed to be protecting the peace. They're supposed to be promoting peace. Now, obviously, there are tens of thousands of police officers out there, and we only hear about the bad ones, the bad things that happen. But if you just look at certain instances, many of these are recorded now. And so you can see that, well, why did the officer do that? Or why did the officer say that? Because the officer is obviously the person in control. And so they can always revert back to that authoritarian policy that you're going to do what I say because I'm the policeman.
And that's kind of the Sandra Bland situation. I was listening to the audio clips yesterday, and we don't have to completely get on this subject, but she was pulled over for, I think, a broken tail light, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Okay. So when he came up to the car, he actually asked her if she could put out the cigarette because she was smoking in the car, and then she refused to put out the cigarette. And then that's kind of when she didn't comply to the officer's request and there was some resistance, I think in his mind, can you please step out of the car? And of course, we've heard the audio that she didn't have to step out of the car. And then that just escalated from there. So you kind of take an approach, well, is it really worth fighting that battle of, well, I asked you to get out of the car, but you're not, so maybe I should just say, okay, well, then I'm not going to let you get out. We can go down that. I'm sure there's a list of things that officer could have done other than dragging her out of the car.
Sure.
Hey, Brian,
yes.
Hey, so I have my thought process. At the end of the day, we don't know what actually happened in the cell.
Jail.
But here's one of the things I look at, because it happens so much with police officers and civilians. Whether despite your race, it's happening so much, and I think that's one of the reasons why it was really hard to look past it. Because it's a repeated thing. Because now, very well so, the police could have been right. They could have been, accurate. Who knows? But the reason that is happening not only in Texas, but in New York, Florida, Chicago,
Missouri.
And just so many different things are happening with the police officers. It's like you don't know what to think anymore. You don't
know what to think anymore. But it does come down to this, and we've talked a little bit about this on the show. There is no respect for authority in this country. And I don't care if you're the manager at Taco Bell. I don't care if you're a teacher, you're a principal, you're a parent, you're a school leader, you're a person at the youth of America. For the most part, there is a lack of respect for anybody that's in authority. So there is a movement almost to challenge everybody in authority. So when you're told to do something, it's like, F you, I don't have to do it.
Oh, Brian.
I mean, that's exactly, in a lack of better terms, that's almost what that's been said.
Oh, and also breaking news. This just happened. The Chicago mayor has ordered all police officers, every police officer in Chicago, to have tasers or taser training by June 1st, 2016.
Okay, I'm in all support of that because I do think that I defend police officers. I think they go out and put their life on the line every single day for you and I.
Absolutely.
But there's probably certain instances that you can't. A taser is a better alternative than pulling the trigger on a gun.
Well, in one of my classes with it was a conflict resolution class for specifically for law enforcement, and we were using a real case study that it wasn't a Texas case study, but it was from one of our bordering states. I don't want to throw any Sooner under the bus, but
that's funny.
All right, be careful.
So anyway, so you have a patrolman who wanted to have a mediation with his chief because the chief had put a bad write-up in his jacket because he had cussed, and it was against that police department's policy to cuss. So you got a demerit or you got a bad letter in your jacket, and so I asked because we were role playing and I knew the facts of the case. So anyway, I asked the officer, well, and explain to me what happened. So as a mediator, I'm wanting them to explain to me, but primarily to explain to the person that we're also mediating with, which is the chief. And so the police officer says, well, I was responding to a call that the person was armed, that the person had already committed the robbery. And when I pulled up, he's running down the alley. Now, he fits the description. He's got a gun in his hand, and he's got a bag of cash or whatever it was. And so this alleged perpetrator is running, and the police officer does what he's supposed to do. Now, there's a camera in the alley because of the type of business this was.
Sure.
And so all of you don't see the audio. Well, you hear a little bit of the audio, but you certainly see the visual. And so the police officer yells, police, stop. Police officer, stop. He yells it very loud 3 times. And just like you said earlier, Brian, no respect for authority. So the guy's running. I mean, he's got a gun in one hand and a bag of cash in the other hand. And so he's running. And so then the police officer says, hit the ground, you MF. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. What did he do? He hit the ground. Yeah. Because he understood that communication. And so then because he used the MF word, the chief wrote him up. And so I asked the chief, well, Chief, putting yourself in that situation, so you already know the man's armed, you already know he's committed the robbery, you pull up, he's running down the street, and you holler at him 3 times, police, stop.
Please stop, please stop.
And if he doesn't comply, what are you going to do? And the chief sat back and thought for a second, and then he said, I'd have tased him. I said, so what's going to look worse on the 5 o'clock news?
Yeah.
Okay, somebody who's said hit the ground, MF, and he hits the ground, or the guy flailing around because he's just been tased.
Yes.
So which one is going to make the police department look in the worst position? Yeah. And so he said, you're right.
You're right.
The officer did, even though he violated policy, he still took the action that was the best for that situation.
At the end of the day, no harm, no foul on the police department or the victim or the person. Right. I know, I agree. So that's a great point. I thank you for bringing that up because they've got big problems in Chicago, obviously. So hopefully that will minimize the number.
It's just crazy. I know we have to go to break, but I'm going to say this. You would think a guy who was the chief of staff to the president of the United States
Preach.
and not mayor,
Preach.
will have better control of a city. I mean, this is a man.
I didn't like it when he was on the Obama administration.
I mean, this is a man who
I knew Rahm Emanuel. I knew his background. I didn't like him.
I mean, this is a man second in charge, quote unquote, of the country. But you can't control the city.
I know.
That's my thoughts.
I completely agree with you, and I think and to hold that piece of evidence like they did for so long.
Oh.
That's which.
Are you talking about the?
I'm talking about
the 16 shots.
Yes, the 16 shots.
Yes.
That clearly, not even one shot should have been fired. It should have been a taser. It could have been just a takedown physically, not 16 shots.
Well, the first thing to look at is, I know we're about to hit break, but is if you look at the video, he was not walking towards the he was walking away.
At all.
Hey, what about those little balls they shoot? What do you call those?
Like Dog the Bounty Hunter shoots?
Yeah, well, not that.
Like airsoft guns?
Yeah.
I don't know if that would
Well, they have the bean bags and they have the concussion grenade. They have all of those things that are supposedly non-lethal and would certainly be a preference. Obviously, tasers would be too, but you have the officer in Arlington, he used the taser, but so many of these people are so up on drugs that a taser's not going to affect them.
You play Florida Georgia Line music, they'll hit the ground immediately. It's so bad. It's so bad. All right, let's take a quick break. We will get to the top stories of 2015 when we come back and talk a little bit more with Gary Lacefield. Hang with us. All right, 49 minutes past the hour, right here on DFW Business Today. I am Brian Glenn.
I'm loving these beats, Brian.
I am. I dropped these beats earlier this morning. I laid them down.
Oh, so you can spin? You can
yes,
spin?
I can wiki.
All right, okay.
I can do it to the best of my ability.
I have to send you over to the sister station, KLTY.
Yeah, I would love to go over there. I love music in general, and I would love to set the music tracks up. That'd be fun. Okay, we're going to wrap up our session here with Dr. Gary Lacefield, and it's been a very interesting conversation the last 2 hours. I've enjoyed having you in. I want you to come back because there's so much. I know, you look at your wife, there's so much we can talk about for what you do at the university and just all your experience over time. But I want to take a few minutes and just kind of recap the stories that made headlines back in 2015. And we'll do that. We'll continue this conversation actually tomorrow as well, because there's just so much to get into. But, when you look at the sports world and you look at the world of just news, when you look at the stories that made headlines in 2015, it's easy. You could easily get depressed.
Absolutely.
For everything from terrorism, the attacks on the Charlie Hebdo situation, that started basically 1 week into the new year of 2015. We had that attack on that newspaper in Paris, obviously killing like 9 others. It was just an awful, and that I think in a way set the tone of what 2015 would be all about, because it is all about plane crashes, terrorism, disease, natural disasters. I mean, you just go down the list, and we'll do that real quickly.
Mass shootings,
and it seems like it's every year like this. I mean, it's when we recapped 2012, when we recapped 2001. Of course, okay, 2001. I could obviously the big story there, but has it always been this bad? Have the stories in the news always been this negative?
Well, I think it's just the nature that people want to hear these type of stories because they appear to be more interesting.
Absolutely.
And what's the old saying? And I'm not a media guy, but if it
bleeds, it leads.
If it bleeds, it leads. Yeah. Or if it has a puppy, or if it has those things in
those elements.
Those elements. So, I've been around 6+ decades, and I don't remember it being near as especially the mass shooting issues. I think this last year was, but when I see all these negative things in the press, I look at them as opportunities that we, these are things we need to fix. These are things we need to work on. These are things that that obviously, I've touted Tarleton State, the School of Criminology, but all of these things that are negatives, we need to use them as examples to not repeat them in the future. Just like our working with the kids on the truancy to prison pipeline. Yes, we know that exists, but what we need to do is to find out why and get these kids back on track. Give them role models, give them leads in order to show what they can do with their lives.
Absolutely, because to recap, you've got the Paris incident with the Charlie Hebdo. Mm-hmm. That goes into the German Wings flight 9525 on March 24th that crashed, killed everybody on board. You have the death by police officers. That this overwhelming wave of police brutality, and you can go back and forth and say, well, certain circumstances aren't real. You hate to see it, but the attack on police officers in general, but then the police officers' attack on the black community is certainly something that should be addressed. You've got the Amtrak train crash that happened in Philly, killed 8 people. Once again, something that's it's death.
Things you couldn't anticipate.
Prison escape in New York. Remember those 2 guys that broke out of prison? It was one of the biggest stories of the summer. It was like something out of a freaking movie, Hollywood script. These guys were on the run. Finally was found after this long manhunt up in upstate New York. That all came to an end. Plus, then you had somebody within the prison system that helped them get out, that had this elaborate story, what she was going to get when they got out. Horrible story. The shootings down in Charleston.
Oh, unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Once again, but where I'm going with this, and I could probably read off one more, on the air shooting in Virginia. I remember seeing that
that was crazy.
That was crazy that morning with the reporter out there. And this was all, and then with social media, some of this stuff is posted up immediately that the guy had basically recorded on a GoPro, essentially,
right? All
this footage and then uploaded it when he was on the run. So some of that video was leaked out, and then eventually I think YouTube pulled it back where it was no longer accessible. But
but you know what though? I know it's a little bit deeper than what we have time for. I wish the FCC would, make a law to where any personality, TV or radio, who's out on location are assigned security. Some of that nature, because it's almost like you said, presidential candidates. They are, they talk about controversial issues, different things like that. But at some point, hey, we as a media, we are supposed to relate information. But just my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So
I was never, because of the news I covered was mostly light and lifestyle. I was never in any kind of harm's way. Now, with saying that, after my live shots, I would always be with a photographer, and we'd always go somewhere to cover a story. And a couple of times we were in some dark, it's 2:00 in the morning. There's no street lights. You can't see anything, and you're in some bad areas.
Right.
And even the photographer would say, I'm not getting out of the car. But for the most part, I agree with you.
Maybe we should get Mesa chopsticks or something. I don't know.
Well, if my cameraman said he wasn't getting out of the car,
I'm not getting out.
I'm going to be right there behind him.
Yeah. So fortunately, I didn't have to deal with that. But there's just so many murder trials with even the Hernandez, with the Patriots Aaron Hernandez trial.
Now that was crazy.
That was
all that good talent going the way.
That was twisted.
And how the Patriots didn't know about any of that.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
And then really to go to the Syrian refugees. That is just another story, and that's a heated topic here in this country. Obviously, with the presidential race, mm-hmm. you're either for it or against it. And I had a great conversation with a Muslim business owner in my area where I live. I ran into him real quickly. He was a great guy. did not want one Syrian refugee in this country, which was because he knew all about kind of what they stand for, and I thought that was very interesting. But we got about 15 seconds left. Thank you so much for joining us. Real quickly,
one other quick topic that's going to be maybe a big issue next year, 2016, is the campus carry. I was the moderator for Tarleton State for our open campus, full campus forum on the open carry on campuses.
I want to have you back in and talk about that, because that is a huge issue that goes in effect on Friday. Hey, thanks for joining us. We'll be back here tomorrow at 7 o'clock, and we will recap the entire 2015 news stories and how it relates to business.
I'm bringing my New Year's hat and everything.
Do that. All right. We'll catch you back here tomorrow. Have a great day.